Hi everyone, my name is Amanda and welcome to my channel Chickadee Cottage Creations. In today's video we're actually going to be taking items from Sonnet's September Makers Box and we're going to be upcycling them. This is part of a collaboration, so there are several other creators from Sonnet's membership group who will also be doing videos, and Sonnet will have these all in a playlist. To get started, I'm going to show you actually what's in the September Makers Box. This one has been so far my absolute favorite. The first two are papers from Connie from the Painted Photographer. This one is a lantern, and as soon as I saw it, I knew exactly what I wanted to try with it. This is my favorite. I love pumpkins. I love everything fall, everything pumpkins. These are just so spectacularly painted. I love everything she does. Every month Sonnet includes some little bonuses, and these are two of the bonuses that came in the box this month. They're just they're napkins for decoupage. I absolutely love them. I'm just removing some of the extra papers that I had there. So this next one is a master board from Upcycles, and if you've ever seen Upcycles papers master boards, they're amazing. There's so much you can do with just one master board piece. I'll open it up here and kind of show you what's all included on it. I have several ideas for some of the pieces that I have left over, but just look at this. There's so much included on here. These colors are amazing. It goes perfectly with a nice muted fall decor. I love it. I absolutely love it. I'm going to be ordering some more of this one for sure. The birds, the butterflies, I love it so much. And then the other paper this month from Upcycles is this plaid. It perfectly matches everything else. It's got that nice kind of a muted fall color palette, which I really like. And it also came with, every month you get a sample of Sweet Pickins milk paint. This month was Willow. I didn't use it in this video, but I will be using it in a future video at some point. We also got two colors for DIY paints. The one is Summer Splash, and off the top of my head I am forgetting what the other one was. And then we got two fusion paints, Seaside and the oh my gosh, Woodwick. Farm Fresh was the other one. I'm sorry, Farm Fresh and Summer Crush were the two DIY paints. And then Soapstone and Woodwick were the two fusion paints. So for project one, this is a board from a local winery. I'm assuming they probably used it for cheese or something. I picked it up at a garage sale, and I'm going to be decoupaging onto this. With decoupage paper, if you want the design on the paper to pop it all and not blend into the background, it's recommended to put some white paint behind it. So that's what I'm doing. I'm taking some White Swan from DIY, and I'm just painting that middle section inside the grooves there, because that's the only spot that I plan on putting decoupage paper. I'm just being a little careful to not go over the edges, which with the Perfectionist brush that I'm using is really not too hard to do at all. It's funny, while out garage sailing I actually found 3 of these boards at completely separate houses. It was a little amusing. I only did one coat of this. You don't need to do a super solid coat since it's just going to have paper over the top of it. And now I'm going to be taking, this is one of the pieces from that master board, and this just looked like it would fit perfectly. It was vertical. It had that little kind of almost like a stamp at the top. It just seemed to line up perfectly for this board. So I'm trying to line it up there exactly where I want it. And then once I have that done, I'm just using my fingers to kind of push down on the edges so that I know where to cut. Because there's a groove, I can't really sand the edges off. It would be kind of difficult to do, so I'm going to need to cut the paper to be exact. So I'm using my finger to create an indent in the paper so that, as you can see there, I've got kind of a nice outline to cut. The only downside here was that there was a little, looked almost like a label that just came over onto this section that I was cutting out just a little bit. I would have loved to have used that label in something else, but unfortunately I had to keep it in this section. So you'll see here on the bottom left, there's just that little piece of the label. It's fine. And I'm just positioning it to make sure that I have it exactly where I want it. Once I start putting the decoupage on, it's going to pretty much stay where I put it. And I'm using my liquid patina from DIY. It's my favorite decoupage medium. I did used to use the Mod Podge, I've said that before, but this one I just like a whole lot more. It's lighter, it's easier to apply. So I'm applying an even strip across the top there, and then I'm just laying that first section down and I'm smoothing it out. And then I put a layer of the liquid patina over top of that again, just to seal that in. And then I go through the entire thing and I just keep adding a strip, putting it back down, smoothing out any wrinkles there might be, and then putting a layer of the liquid patina over the top. And you'll see here, sometimes I might smooth it out with my finger just to get a little crease or a wrinkle out. They do occasionally appear. And then once it's done, I do let it dry for probably about an hour. And then I wanted to, it doesn't really pop much right now, and I would have loved to have had maybe like a reddish brown, but this brown was actually perfect too. This is the Woodwick from the Fusion Mineral Paint. So I'm just going to apply that in the groove around the picture. It'll create almost like a frame, and because it's a darker color from that white background, it's going to kind of help to pop it out from the board. And here's the finished product. I did, I think, 2 coats of the Fusion paint in the groove just to keep it in there. And because Fusion paint has a sealer included, you don't have to seal this project at all. I could put a seal over the decoupage, but even that, you don't have to. It's actually good to go as it is. I really like the way that turned out. So for project 2, this one is actually my favorite of all of the projects. I know I said at the beginning that I love pumpkins, and I really do, so I really wanted to do something special for these pumpkins that Connie had created. And I found this frame at, might have been the bins, might have been a garage sale, I'm actually not sure. I didn't pay much for it at all. It has a slight slope to it, and the frame itself looked pretty smooth. Obviously that color doesn't go with this at all, and I'm pretty sure that Connie used weathered wood in her picture there for the stem and in the ground around the pumpkins. So that's actually what I'm using here on the frame, the weathered wood from DIY. This was in a previous box, but you can also just purchase the weathered wood. And I'm applying an even coat across the entire frame. I'm not as concerned with this coat. This is just a coat that's going to go under the molds that I'm going to put on the frame. I just wanted to do a coat on the frame first so that I wouldn't have any of the frame showing underneath the molds at all. I'm just doing a quick coat across the entire thing. And even here you can't really see any wood grain at all, but later on I was pleasantly surprised when I applied the wax later on. You'll see what I mean. Alright, so I let that dry, set it off to dry, and I was trying to decide which of these 2 molds I was going to use. There's the acorn and oak leaves, or there was the pumpkin. The pumpkin, I thought about using the ivy just to kind of match the pumpkin, but it didn't have the right look to it. It wouldn't have fit the corner of the frame as well. So I'm going to use the oak and acorns mold from IOD. And I'm just going to pour a bunch of it and then fill all these in. I love this mold so much, so I'm most assuredly going to be using these in future projects, so I had no problem mixing some extra resin. It's equal parts of part A to part B, and that almost looked like I was drinking it, but I promise I was not. I was just checking the lines on the bottle to make sure I had the right measurements, because you do want equal parts. And then you stir it up until it starts, well, it doesn't start, it becomes clear. And you'll start to feel it get a little bit warm in the container, and that's when you can start pouring it. But you do want to pour it relatively quick. You only have about a couple minutes of leeway to be able to pour this before it starts to harden. And then it becomes kind of syrupy almost and is very difficult to pour. So I'm just filling up any of these that I think that I might want to use. And then I actually have so much left over that I just kept filling others. Because again, as I said, this is a mold that I will most assuredly be using in the future. And I still had a little bit extra, so I just pulled over that pumpkin mold again and filled in one of the leaves. And with resin, it takes, at least with this one, it's the amazing casting resin, it takes about 10 minutes for it to set. And you'll see once it's done, it turns white, and that's when you know that it's pretty good to go. These are still a little bit warm, which is perfect because the frame is a little curved, so I do need to curve these just a little bit around the frame. And because it's still warm, it's going to allow me to mold it to the frame. If it had been any other shape, I might have used air dry clay, but in this case, since one of the leaves is going to be sticking off the edge there, I did want to use resin. It's just a little more stable. So I'm just kind of playing around with it here, just trying to see what layout I might like. I knew I wanted something on the top left and the top or bottom right. And I wasn't liking anything of the little pieces. They just didn't seem to quite fit. So I went ahead and went with these. I'm going to then use the Titebond Quick and Thick. I use this in so many projects. It's a great glue. And I'm just going to apply a little layer to the back, and then I'm going to gently press it down onto the frame. If there is any glue that leaks out, I do clean it up immediately. And I've got them all glued down now, and I'm just cleaning up a little bit of the excess glue there. Alright, and I let those set for a little bit. The glue itself takes hold pretty quickly, but I did set that bottle of paint on top of the bottom right just because those acorns were resting on top of the other one and I wanted them to stay relatively flat. So I'm taking that weathered wood again and I'm just giving everything a good coat of paint. You can see here I sped through it just a little bit so you don't have to watch me paint it all. And you do have to turn it all sorts of different angles just to make sure you get all the edges and little nooks and crannies of those leaves. There's a lot of detail in them. And I also made sure to paint the back of the leaves that were hanging over so that you won't ever see the white resin. See there, I went through and painted that. And then I set this aside and let it dry. Actually, most likely I probably used my heat gun to dry it because I have the patience of a toddler. Alright, now that it's dry, I'm going to take some white wax. And this is when I was pleasantly surprised. So right now the frame looks pretty smooth. It looks almost like it could be like a plastic frame. But I take some white wax and I just apply a pretty thick coat of it across the entire frame. I'm making sure to dab it into all the little ridges of the leaves there. I'm just trying to cover everything in this white wax. And once I've got everything covered, I'm going to let it sit then for about 10 to 15 minutes. Sorry, I went a little off frame there. But you get the idea. I'm just dabbing it in, tapping it into the different cracks of the mold there. Alright, so I've let this set for 10 to 15 minutes and then I just come back with a cloth, and here's where I was really pleasantly surprised. So as I'm wiping away wood grain is coming through, and I hadn't seen this wood grain on the frame at all. I hadn't seen it on the paint when I had the paint on there, and I did have to clamp that one leaf. It apparently hadn't glued quite all the way, but this is how it turned out. I love this so much. I love that mold. I love the pumpkins. I just love the way the grain is showing on the frame. This is by far my favorite project of today's video. And now we are on to project 3. This was a fun one. I've seen this. It's all the rage right now on all the different Pinterest and crafting channels and things like that. I'm going to try a busted canvas. I saw that lantern and my first thought, I'd been wanting to try a busted canvas for a little while, but my first thought was to use that for it. So I picked up this scrapbook paper at Hobby Lobby, I'm pretty sure. And I thought it had some really nice fall color. So I'm just going to do what I always do. I apply a strip at the top. And the nice thing about scrapbook paper, it's so thick you really don't have to worry about wrinkling at all. So I've applied that strip. I'm going to make sure that I position it. I'm not worried about going all the way to the edges, since with a busted canvas you don't need to go all the way to the edge. If anything, in hindsight, I went a little too far to the edge with my cuts, but it still turned out great. So I'm just going to decoupage this to the back of the frame. And if you've never seen a busted canvas, you might be wondering why, but you'll see shortly why. I'm going to make sure that it's all decoupaged down, and I let this one dry, I think, for maybe an hour before I went and did the other side. Couple little bubbles in there, made sure to get them out. Alright, so while that's drying, I have a piece of black foam board, and I'm going to decoupage the lantern to it. And same process as always, I just apply a strip at the top, make sure it's positioned where I want it. And then I just apply the decoupage medium over top of that after I've laid it down. You can see here I'm finishing that up. I'm not worried about the edges of this just yet. And then I set that aside to dry, and while that's drying, I am now going to decoupage some of this plaid paper onto the front of the canvas. Normally I would probably decoupage around the edges of the canvas as well, but in this case I'm going to be using a frame, so I'm actually not worried about the edges. But I just laid it on there, kind of did a rough crease with my fingers just so that I knew roughly where to cut it, so as to not waste any paper. And I am wearing gloves. I know it's still technically summer, but this happened to be the weekend when it dropped down to 50 degrees here, so I was stubbornly refusing to turn on my heat, so I was wearing my, I guess what they're, arm sleeves? I don't know what they're called. Arm muffs. I have no idea, but I have tons of them. I love them. I'm always cold. So as always, I apply a strip at the top, put the paper over top, and then I'm applying a thin layer over top of that. And the decoupage paper is obviously thinner than the scrapbook paper, so it took a little bit more to get the wrinkles out of this, but because it was going on canvas, it was relatively straightforward. And then I set that aside to dry. Once it's dry, I've got that paper on the back, the paper on the front. So here's where the fun of a busted canvas comes in. You cut, and at first I cut, and then I was like, wait a minute, that's not really centered. It was still fine, so I kind of marked where I wanted that center mark to be, and then I made the cuts from there, going around. It would have been smarter for me to make that cut first, but I didn't. It was fine though. It having that little overlap didn't affect anything at all. I'm just cutting, I don't know, some tears in this canvas as if somebody had punched through it. And then what I'm doing, you'll see here that I'm folding these up. I'm going to, once I've got them, and here's where I think I maybe cut a little too far towards the canvas. There were a few spots where you could see the edge of the board on the lantern, and it probably would have been better had I not cut as far up, but I still think it turned out great. So I took my hot glue gun. I made sure it was on the 60 watt and not the 100. The 100 would have been too liquid, and I didn't want it so liquid that it took forever to set. So I was just putting some on here, and then I had to hold it. And you did have to hold it for a little bit. I cut a lot of that out because it took me probably a good 10 to 15 minutes to get all of these done, just because you had to sit and hold them for a little while. I did figure out finally to be able to start holding 2 of them at a time, so it went a little faster there. You'll see I kind of realized that I could actually do 2 at a time. But if you don't hold them, the canvas itself is pretty heavy, so it will pull back quite a bit at first. So you just got to let it sit until it's solid enough where it doesn't pull back. And here's what it looks like, and it's kind of a really neat effect. I've seen all sorts of different versions of these busted canvases. Whoever first came up with it, who I have no idea who that was, it was kind of brilliant. So I put this over, and I realized that that white line is just really kind of a stark contrast and doesn't look good at all. So I decided I'm going to paint around the lantern with some black DIY paint. Might have been Little Black, I'm not sure which one this was. Any black paint will do. And I probably didn't need to kind of stipple it the way that I am. I just didn't want it to be this super sharp, crisp edge. I even go at a bit of an angle around the top and edges. And you'll see there, that's kind of the finished. And I do paint the inside of the frames right by the edges, just because you can see through at that point, and I don't want any of the frame, the wood piece of the canvas, showing through. Alright, so we've now got that. So I flipped it over and I took some fairy lights and I kind of just tucked them under, and I did glue them in a couple spots just to kind of hold them in place. And now I'm attaching that board with the lantern on it to the back of this canvas. I realized I still needed a little bit more glue there. I didn't want to get out another glue stick. Okay. So then I gently here press it. I don't want to flatten out the canvas on the front, so I press it there gently, and then I flip it over and I press it down harder here. And I just hold it in place until it's got a decent hold. And I have a black frame. I actually got a bunch of these at Michael's when they had a buy one get 2 free sale, so I have a bunch of stuff in these because I like the way it makes them pop. And this is how it looks. It looks even better in the dark, and I've got a picture of that at the end of this video for you to see. I think it turned out great for my first attempt at a busted canvas. I've seen so many different variations of them. It would be kind of fun to explore the different creative ways you can use it. For project 4, and this is technically project 4 and 5, but they're 2, I got these at a garage sale. They were just 2 cardboard containers, and I don't really know how to describe them. Almost like a hat box, but not the shape of a hat box. So for this first one, I'm going to use the Summer Crush. It's the perfect orange for this. I think probably Summer Crush is used way more in the fall than it is summer. But I'm going to give it, in this case I had to give it 3 coats of the orange paint. Obviously not going to make you watch all that, but because of the black, it needed the full 3 coats. Get the rim too, just wanting to make sure it has a bit of a finished look. And then I'm going to take the Fusion, let's see, this one was the Woodwick color, and I'm going to paint the lid of that particular container. My first brush was not working so particularly great, so I switched. And I'm just applying an even coat across the entire thing. With Fusion paint, you don't have to seal it, so that's one nice benefit. The DIY paint that I use, the Orange Summer Crush, I am for sure going to have to seal that one, but the Fusion I do not have to seal. So once I've got that on there, I decide to use this owl. The shape just seemed to work pretty well for the shape of the lid, and I have not so far decoupaged anything without putting white behind it, and I wanted to try it on this one just to see how it turned out. Everything I've done before with decoupage, I've always put the white behind the paper. So I kind of rough cut around it, and at first I thought I was going to cut exactly to the lid, but then I realized that it was off-centered, so I knew I was going to have to adjust my initial plan, so I kind of trimmed down a bit. That's what it would have been if it fit, but as you see, it was off-center. It wouldn't have looked right. So I ended up cutting a little extra off to try to give it a little bit of an edge around it. And that's close. I adjusted a little bit more. I keep trimming until it gets to roughly a shape that I think is okay for the lid. And again, normally I would have painted white on the back of this, so then it would have popped even more off of the lid, but I kind of wanted to see, because that color is used a lot in this paper from Recycled, I thought it actually might be nice to just decoupage directly to it, just to see how it kind of merges with the background. So like I do with everything else, I take the DIY liquid patina and I apply an even strip at the top. And then I lay it down on top of it and apply an even strip over the top of the paper. And I just keep going until I've done the entire thing. And I don't know, I mean, I like the way it blends into the background, but I think maybe I might have liked it a little more if it popped. I feel like I did the owl a little bit of an injustice because he isn't as visible. I'd love to know your thoughts on that. So I'm doing a similar thing with a smaller one of these two. This one I'm using this, it's not a deer, I don't think. I'm not exactly sure what that is. But this one I am cutting exactly to the size of the top of that container. And I'm leaving it black, I'm leaving the edges of the lid black, but I am going to paint the top white because I do want this to pop off of the top. And I'm just checking. I found a few areas where I needed to trim a little bit more just to make sure that it fit well. I didn't want to use sandpaper on this, being that it was cardboard. That would not have done great things to the cardboard. So first I was going to grab the liquid patina, and then I was like, oh wait, I need to paint the top of this white. So I get out the Cashmere by Fusion, and I paint a layer of white across the top. Being careful not to go over the edge there. I apparently wasn't careful enough. I had to do a little bit of cleanup on the edge. And I take my heat gun to kind of speed up the drying because I am not a patient crafter. So then I can take my liquid patina, and now I can do the same thing I always do. I apply a strip at the top, although in this case it's so small I just covered the entire thing. It was a lot easier that way. And I did end up accidentally cutting the paper when I was cutting it out, as you see there. That you won't see it at all once. That's the beauty of decoupage. You can fix mistakes like that so easily, and they'll never be seen. You can't look, if you look at it now, you can't tell that it was ever torn. I'm just applying that thin layer across the top. smoothing out any wrinkles I might find. And then I want to take this plaid, which actually matches one of my son's plaid shirts exactly. I have to send Sonnet a picture of that, it amused me. But I'm doing the same thing here, so I'm applying a strip of the decoupage, and then I realized I was actually making it harder by myself with so much overlap, so I quickly cut off that overlap. And then I go through and I decoupage around the entire thing. Same way as always, I apply a strip underneath, place the paper over top, and then apply the decoupage over the top of the paper. And I'm just about at the end. I do cut where they merge. I did pretty good. I had a tiny little crack of white showing through there, but for the most part, I did pretty good on this. And then I let that dry, and as soon as it's dry, I then end up sanding off the bottom so that it's flat. And here are the finished containers. I think together they actually look really great together, especially since it's using the same papers there, so it's got that kind of common color theme going throughout. Be really great for a little vignette display or just something to even stack on a shelf for the fall season. And these are the final projects. I'd love to know what you think, especially what you think of my busted canvas. I don't fully love it, but I also, especially in the dark, I think it really pops a lot more. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to try some more. If you've tried them, I'd love to hear. But thanks for watching, and I do hope you'll hit that subscribe button and join us for future videos.